A woman who can't have children is just a placeholder. The words spoken by my mother-in-law Judith were not a shout. They were delivered with the calm precision of a surgeon, making a final fatal incision. The clinking of silverware against porcelain stopped. The only sounds left in the cavernous dining room were the low hum of the air conditioning and the frantic thumping in my own ears. My fork halfway to my mouth froze in midair. The scent of rosemary from the cooling roast suddenly smelled like something funereal. Across the polished mahogany table, my husband Evan stared at his plate. His father Harold did the same. They were masters of strategic silence. Judith slid a thick envelope across the table. It stopped just short of my wine glass. Evan and I have discussed this. It's time for the Cole family to have a future. A real one. My gaze flickered to my younger sister Leah, who had arrived late, smelling of a perfume I didn't recognize. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Her hand was resting protectively on her stomach. And then I knew. It wasn't a thought, it was a physical certainty, a cold weight that settled deep in my bones. Leah is pregnant, Judith announced to the silent room. Her voice held a note of triumph. She's giving Evan the child you couldn't. There it was. 9 years of marriage, of building a business from nothing, of enduring endless doctor's appointments and quiet, invasive questions, all erased in a single sentence. 9 years as a wife reduced to a placeholder. Evan finally looked up. His eyes were full of a strange, desperate relief. It's a miracle, Hannah. Finally. A miracle. He used that word as he watched my sister carry his child. He made it sound like I was the curse that had finally been broken. The family aligned in a silent tableau of agreement. No one defended me. No one even flinched. Leah kept her head down, but I saw her thumb stroking the screen of her phone, a nervous, constant habit. My body felt distant, an object I was operating from miles away. My hands, however, were perfectly steady. My breathing was even. I focused on the documents inside the pristine white envelope. I could see the crisp blue ink of the signature line. Judith watched me, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. She was waiting for the collapse. The tears, the pleading, the predictable, messy drama of a discarded woman. I expected a scene, she said, her voice laced with disappointment. Tears, the usual hysterics. I pulled the pen from my purse. The cap clicked off with a sound that seemed to cannon through the silence. I signed my name, Hannah Pierce Cole, on the line she had prepared. My signature was firm, clear, and steady. I pushed the papers back across the table. You expected something wrong, I said. Then I stood up, placed my napkin on the table, and walked out of their house for the last time, leaving the family to their miracle. The drive was quiet. I didn't turn on the radio. The streets of Houston slid by a blur of familiar lights that suddenly felt like a foreign country. I didn't drive back to the house I had shared with Evan for 9 years. The house I had designed, decorated and filled with a warmth he and his family had never truly matched. Instead, I took the exit for the Galleria and pulled into the covered garage of a new apartment building, one with no memories attached. 3 weeks ago, a persistent unease had settled over me. It was a quiet hum of wrongness, Evan's late nights, the hushed phone calls, the way Leah had started avoiding my calls. I'd told myself I was being paranoid, but I had learned long ago to trust the quiet alarms my body sent me. So I had rented this place, a small 2-bedroom apartment under my own name, paid for with my own money, an escape route I hoped I would never need. Inside, the air smelled of fresh paint and new carpet. It was empty except for a single cardboard box on the kitchen counter. For the past few weeks, I had been quietly collecting things, not clothes or furniture, documents, evidence of my life, of my work. I opened the box. Inside were files, binders, and hard drives. Contracts I had negotiated, logistics software I had designed, client lists I had cultivated, the entire operational blueprint for Cole Logistics, a company that bore my husband's name but had been built with my mind in my hands. My fingers brushed against a thick leather-bound folder at the bottom. The label read, Partition Agreement 2021. I I remembered the day I signed it 6 years ago. Judith had presented it as a necessity. It's to protect the Cole family assets from your business risks, dear. She had explained, her tone dripping with false concern. We can't have your ventures putting Evan's inheritance at risk. At the time, my own lawyer had raised an eyebrow. This is interesting, he'd said. She thinks she's walling off the family money. But what this actually does under Texas law is designate your new consulting firm, Pierce Consulting, as your own separate property. Any intellectual property you create under that name, your personal client relationships, your patents, it all belongs to you, Hannah, exclusively. Judith had built me a lifeboat thinking she was locking me in a cage. I stared at the document. 9 years. 9 years of my life, my ambition, my creativity. They hadn't just ended a marriage. They had declared war on my entire existence. They thought I would walk away, broken with nothing. They thought I was just a placeholder. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The next morning, the sun streamed into the empty living room. I was sitting on the floor surrounded by papers when my phone buzzed. The caller ID read Carmen Delgado. I answered. Hannah speaking. Hannah, it's Carmen. I heard some rumors this morning. Are you okay? Carmen was the chief operations officer at Cole Logistics. In reality, she was my second in command. She reported to me, took her orders from me, and strategized with me. Evan just approved the paychecks. I'm fine, Carmen, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Don't lie to me, she said, her voice warm but firm. Evan came in this morning and could barely answer a simple question about the Port of Houston contract. Judith was on the phone with him 3 times in the first hour. Whatever is happening, everyone who matters knows you're the one who runs this place. A wave of gratitude so sharp it almost hurt washed over me. Thank you, Carmen. I need a favor. A big one. And it needs to be quiet. Anything. There was no hesitation. I need you to start compiling documentation, I said, my mind racing. Every email I sent, every strategic plan I authored, every client negotiation I led. Especially focus on the big 3, Maxwell Petrocorp and Jensen Shipping. Those relationships are with me, not with the Cole name. Those were the relationships that constituted my personal goodwill, the ones legally tied to me. Consider it done, Carmen said. Hannah, be careful. Judith was asking about transition plans yesterday. She's been planning this. I know, I said, looking at the partition agreement in my lap. But so have I. We hung up. For a long moment, I sat in silence. I had an ally. I had documentation. I had a legal firewall they didn't even understand they'd given me. But it wasn't enough. To fight a woman like Judith, I needed more than a shield. I needed a sword. I picked up my laptop, opened the browser, and typed the words that would change everything. Divorce Attorney Asset Protection, Houston. The law office of Michael Reeves was on the 32nd floor of a skyscraper in downtown Houston, a place of cool glass and quiet, expensive-looking steel. It felt a world away from Judith Cole's mahogany dining room. The space was minimalist organized and radiated a sense of calm, controlled power, just like the man who stood to greet me. Michael Reeves was in his early 40s, with sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing and a handshake that was firm and brief. He didn't offer condolences or platitudes. He offered me a bottle of water and gestured to the chair opposite his desk. Tell me what happened. I laid it all out. The 9 years of marriage, the business I built, the dinner, the divorce papers, and finally, the partition agreement from 6 years ago. I slid the leather-bound folder across his wide, uncluttered desk. He read it in silence. His expression didn't change, but I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a deep professional interest. He turned the pages slowly, his focus absolute. After what felt like an eternity, he looked up. This isn't just a legal document, Ms. Cole, he said, his voice even. This is a fortress. Your mother-in-law, in her attempt to protect her family's assets, inadvertently gave you sole ownership of everything that actually matters. Your consulting company, the patents you filed under it, the client relationships you cultivated yourself, under Texas law, This is all your Yaprit property. They can't touch it. A breath I didn't know I was holding escaped my lungs. He leaned forward, his gaze sharpening. But there's something else here that bothers me more. They had divorce papers ready. This wasn't a decision made last week. His eyes held mine. This was an execution. The clinical word hit me harder than Judith's cruelty. He was right. It wasn't a sudden betrayal. It was a plan. Michael saw the shift on my face. I had a father who tried to write me out of his life because he didn't approve of my choices, he said quietly. I know what it looks like when a family decides you're no longer part of the picture. They don't just ask you to leave. They try to make sure you have nowhere to go. He tapped the folder. They failed. I spent the next 2 days in a conference room at Michael's office. It became our war room. We went through every document I had collected, piecing together a timeline, not of a marriage, but of a conspiracy. The divorce papers had been drawn up by Judith's lawyer 6 weeks ago. That was 2 weeks before I had even sensed something was wrong and rented my apartment. My blood ran cold when Michael found the next piece. He changed the beneficiary on his life insurance policy 4 months ago, he said, pointing to a line on a financial statement. He removed you and named Leah Pierce as the sole beneficiary. 4 months. While he was still sleeping in our bed, kissing me good morning, he was already planning for a future that did not include me. A future where my own sister would get everything in the event of his death. It wasn't just about an affair. This was a coup. A long, slow, meticulously planned removal. They had been moving assets, preparing legal documents, and rewriting the story of their family, while I was busy running the company that funded their demise. She's done this before, you know, I said, the memory surfacing unbidden. Not like this. But Judith. She has a pattern. Evan had a serious girlfriend in college. The family loved her. Then, one summer, it was just over. Judith told everyone she wasn't the right fit for the family's future. Everyone just accepted it. Michael made a note. Patterns are useful, was all he said. That night, I went back to my empty apartment. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a crystalline cold rage. I laid out every piece of evidence of my own contribution on the floor. There were the 3 patents for the logistics software I had developed under Pierce Consulting. They were the engine that made coal logistics twice as efficient as our competitors. Legally, they were mine. There were the personal contracts with our 3 biggest clients, Maxwell Petrocorp and Jensen Shipping. I had brought them in. I had managed their accounts. My personal goodwill was the asset, not the coal logistics letterhead. They could follow me. And there was the partition agreement, the firewall Judith herself had insisted upon. Her attempt to protect coal assets had created the very legal weapon I now held. She had underestimated me, had seen me only as a wife, not as a strategist. That was her mistake. I looked at the empire of paper spread across my floor. My work, my value, my 9 years, my entire being had been poured into that company. And a single clear thought rose above the anger and the pain. I want it back. I want everything I built. The final blow didn't come from a lawyer or a bank statement. It came from my phone. I was scrolling numbly through social media, a habit I couldn't seem to break, when a new post from Judith appeared. It was a photo from a family dinner. Not the one where I was executed, but a new one taken just last night. Judith was in the center beaming. Evan was beside her, his arm around Leah, who had one hand placed delicately on her stomach. Her face was glowing. Harold, my father-in-law, stood behind them smiling. They looked perfect, happy, complete. The caption was a perfectly twisted blade, celebrating new beginnings and the bright future of the Cole family. So blessed. The comments poured in. Congratulations. So happy for you all. Leah, you're glowing. I wasn't in the photo. It was as if I had never been there at all. They hadn't just replaced me. They had deleted me. 9 years, and all it took was a single dinner and a social media post to make me vanish. My work, my sacrifices, my entire place in that family erased. The grief I had been holding back finally broke. But it wasn't a grief that made me weak. It was a grief that burned. It was the grief of a creator watching thieves celebrate in the house she had built. They wanted to erase me. They wanted me to disappear quietly. But I was the one who had built their world. And I was the only one who knew how to take it apart. My hands were shaking, but not from sorrow. It was from pure, unadulterated resolve. I found Michael Reeves's number in my contacts and pressed the call button. He answered on the second ring. "Michael Reeves." My voice was quiet. It was cold. It held no tears. "Michael, it's Hannah Cole." I took a breath. "I want everything. Tell me how." "Everything comes with a price, Hannah," Michael said. We were back in his office, the skyline of Houston, a grid of indifferent lights behind him. A whiteboard, previously pristine, was now covered in diagrams and notes, a map of my life reduced to legal entities and asset columns. "We have two paths forward," he pointed to the left side of the board. "Path A is a quick settlement. We leverage the partition agreement and Leah's pregnancy. We argue that you are the victim of a calculated ousting. They'll fight, but to avoid a messy public trial, they'll likely offer you a significant buyout to go away quietly. It's safe. You walk away with a few million, and this is over in a couple of months." Then he pointed to the right. The writing there was more complex, full of arrows and question marks. "Path B is full litigation. We fight for everything. We don't just secure your separate property, Pierce Consulting. We argue that your contributions to Coal Logistics itself, the community property, were so fundamental that you are entitled to more than the standard 50%. We argue that the company's value is in fact your personal goodwill, which should follow you." He paused, letting the weight of it settle in the room. "They won't just roll over. They'll come after you with everything they have. They will claim you were nothing more than a glorified employee. They will try to bury us in paperwork and legal fees. It will be long, it will be ugly, and it will be expensive. But if we win..." He left the sentence hanging in the air. The choice felt like standing on a cliff edge. One path led to a safe, controlled descent. The other was a leap into the storm, with no guarantee of a safe landing. The old Hannah, the one who had spent 9 years making herself smaller to keep the peace, would have taken the settlement. She would have been grateful for a clean break and the money to start over. But that Hannah had died in Judith's dining room. She had been erased in a photograph. "They think I'll take the money and run," I said, my voice quiet. "They're counting on me to be reasonable, to want to avoid a fight." "And do you?" Michael asked, his eyes searching mine. I thought of Evan's face when he called another woman's pregnancy his miracle. I thought of Judith's triumphant smile. I thought of my own sister, her hand on her belly, a silent confirmation of the deepest betrayal imaginable. "No," I said, "I'm not feeling reasonable." I looked him straight in the eye. "Full litigation. We take the harder path." A slow, grim smile touched Michael's lips. "Good. Now the first thing they'll do is try to lock you out of everything. We need to move faster. We need someone on the inside." "I have someone," I said. "Carmen Delgado." The coffee shop was a small independent place, halfway between my apartment and the Coal Logistics office, chosen for its anonymity. Carmen slid into the booth opposite me, her face etched with worry. She wrapped her hands around a warm mug, though the Houston air outside was already thick with humidity. "It's getting strange at the office," she said, her voice low. "Judith has been there every day this week. She's going through personnel files. She asked IT for a log of all your network activity for the past 6 months. My stomach tightened. They were already building their case, looking for any mistake I might have made, any email that could be twisted to fit their narrative. "I need you to be my eyes and ears, Carmen," I said. "But more than that, I need proof. The kind of proof that lives on servers, not just in my memory." I pushed a list across the table. It detailed specific project folders, client communication logs, and internal memos. "I need everything that proves I was the primary decision maker. Strategic plans with my author credentials, Timestamps on documents showing I worked weekends and holidays when Evan was at the golf course. Anything that separates my direct contributions from the company's general operations. Carmen glanced at the list and nodded. This is easy, because it's all true. Evan hasn't made a decision without calling you or his mother in 5 years. The senior staff all know it, the clients know it. She paused, her gaze serious. But Hannah, be careful. Judith is telling people a story, that you're unstable, that the stress of not being able to have a child finally got to you. The lie was so vicious, so perfectly crafted, to prey on the one vulnerability I couldn't hide that it almost took my breath away. She wasn't just trying to take my company. She was trying to rewrite my sanity. Let her tell her stories, I said, my voice harder than I intended. I'll stick to the facts. As I was leaving, Carmen touched my arm. For what it's worth, she said, I'm with you. We all are. I had expected the confrontation, but not like this. Not at my door. I was unpacking a box of books when the knock came. I opened it to find Leah standing in the hallway of my anonymous apartment building. For a second, I was so stunned I couldn't speak. How did she even know I was here? She was dressed in a new, expensive-looking maternity dress, a designer handbag slung over her shoulder. She looked radiant, healthy, fertile. Can I come in? She asked, her voice soft and full of a practiced sympathy that made my skin crawl. Against my better judgment, I stepped aside. She walked into the sparse living room, her eyes scanning the boxes, the bare walls. Oh, Hannah, she sighed, the picture of concern. I never meant for any of this to happen. I just fell in love. Evan and we just connected on a level, well, you understand. I didn't say anything. I just watched her. I watched the way she touched her stomach, the little smile that played on her lips when she thought I wasn't looking. This wasn't remorse. It was a victory lap. Judith has been so supportive, she chattered on, settling on the edge of my new sofa. She's already helping me pick out colors for the nursery in the new house Evan is buying for us near the country club. She says this baby is the best thing that's ever happened to this family. She was twisting the knife, and she knew it. Evan keeps calling it his miracle baby, she said, looking at me with wide, innocent eyes. He says it's proof that you were the problem all along. His miracle. The word again. Miracle. The perfect, blameless word to absolve him of all guilt, all responsibility. It painted him as the victim of my defective body, finally set free by a miracle. My own sister was delivering the verdict. As she spoke, her phone buzzed. She glanced down, her fingers flying across the screen with a practiced speed. I caught a glimpse of the name before she angled the phone away. It wasn't Evan. Miracles, I said, my voice flat. Right. Her head snapped up. For the first time, the mask of sympathy slipped, and I saw a flicker of something else in her eyes. Annoyance. Impatience. You can't be mad at me forever, Hannah, she said, standing up. It's not my fault. You couldn't give him what he needed, what the family needed. After she left, the scent of her unfamiliar, expensive perfume lingered in the air. I stood in the middle of my empty apartment, the silence she left behind louder than her words. It wasn't just a betrayal of love or family. It was a complete and total negation of my life. My 9 years of trying, of hoping, of grieving in silence, all of it had been reframed as my personal failure, a problem that had now been conveniently solved. And Evan's miracle was the weapon they were all using against me. That night, I made a choice. I was done being on the defensive. It was time to go on the attack. My excuse was to collect my personal items from the office. It was a legitimate reason one their lawyers couldn't block. Carmen let me in after hours, the building quiet and empty. The halls of Cole Logistics, once a place that felt like my own creation, now felt like enemy territory. My old office was exactly as I had left it. Photos of Evan and me on the credenza, smiling from a life that no longer existed. I ignored them. "The files you wanted are on this," Carmen whispered, handing me a small encrypted USB drive. "Everything is timestamped and verified. It's a complete record of your work for the past 5 years." I nodded, sliding it into my pocket. "Thank you, Carmen. You're putting yourself at risk." "The real risk would be letting them get away with this," she said. A young analyst one I had hired and mentored walked past the office, his eyes wide. He gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod of support before hurrying on. He mentioned quietly, "Things haven't been the same since you left. Evan can't make a decision without calling his mother." While Carmen stood watch, I logged into my computer one last time. I wasn't stealing company property, I was retrieving my own. Under the partition agreement, the software patents, the proprietary logistics models, the strategic frameworks I had built under the umbrella of Pierce Consulting, they were mine. I initiated a secure transfer, moving the core intellectual property, my intellectual property, from the Cole logistics server to my own private cloud server. It was the digital equivalent of packing my most valuable possessions. As the progress bar crept across the screen, I felt a profound shift. I was no longer just a victim reacting to their attack. I was an active combatant. I had crossed a threshold. I was no longer just trying to survive their war. I was starting my own. I packed a single box of personal effects, a few books, a framed photo of my parents, an award I had won. As I walked out of the office for the last time, the building felt like a hollow shell. The name on the door said Cole, but the heart and mind that had given it life were now gone. And they didn't even know it yet. Back in my apartment, I plugged the USB drive into my laptop. Carmen had done more than I asked. She had included Evan's expense reports, his travelogues, his calendar, a complete picture of his contributions, or rather the lack thereof. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was an email. Not from Evan or Leah or even Judith. It was from a name I didn't recognize from a prestigious old money Houston law firm. The subject line was blunt, Cole versus Cole, counterclaim filing. I opened it. My eyes scanned the dense legal text, the formal language, a cold mask for the brutality of the words. They were accusing me of more than just being a failed wife. They were accusing me of being a criminal. They were counterfiling, alleging that I had mismanaged funds and committed fraud, funneling company money into my own secret ventures. They weren't just trying to divorce me. They were trying to destroy me. "It's a Darvo strategy," Michael said, his voice grim. He was pacing in front of the whiteboard, which was now covered in a new, more aggressive set of diagrams. "Deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. They're not just defending, they're trying to paint you as the villain." I stared at the legal document on the conference table. The words seemed to vibrate with malice. Constructive fraud on the community estate. It sounded ugly, official, terrifying. "What does it actually mean?" I asked, my own voice sounding distant. "It's a serious allegation under Texas law," he explained, stopping his pacing to look directly at me. "They're claiming that you used marital funds money that belonged to the community of you and Evan to secretly build your own separate company, Pierce Consulting. The partition agreement protects your ownership of the company, but it doesn't protect you. If the seed money to start it was community property that you used without Evan's consent." "But that's not what happened," I insisted. "I used my own premarital savings to incorporate Pierce Consulting, every penny." "We know that, and we have the bank records to prove it," Michael assured me. "But this isn't about the truth, Hannah. This is about intimidation. It's a reputation attack. They're trying to scare you into taking a lowball settlement by threatening to drag your professional name through the bid." The calculated cruelty of it was breathtaking. They knew my reputation was everything to me. I had built it from scratch, deal by deal, handshake by handshake, and now they were trying to burn it to the ground. "So what do? We fight back with better facts," he said, his jaw set. "But we also need to understand our opponent, all of our opponents." He gestured toward a small section of the whiteboard dedicated to Leah. "Tell me about your sister." That night, Michael and I had a working dinner at a quiet restaurant. The pretense of it being a social meal faded quickly as we spread documents across the table between plates of food. He wanted to know everything about my family, about the dynamic between my sister and me, about our parents. My parents are distant, I explained, choosing my words carefully. They live in Florida now. After Dad retired, they sort of checked out. Leah was the surprise baby, the fun one. I was the serious older sister who left home at 18 and paid her own way through college. They love me, I suppose, in their own way. But Leah was always the one they worried about, the one who needed protecting. And you were the one who did the protecting, Michael guessed. I nodded, a familiar ache settling in my chest. I paid for her first car. I co-signed on her first apartment. I got her a job at Cole Logistics when she dropped out of her marketing degree, a job she had used to get close to my husband. And now she has a new protector, Michael said, not unkindly. As he spoke about strategy, his professional guard lowered for a moment. He told me more about his own battle with his father. He was a formidable man, Michael said, swirling the ice in his glass. Built a manufacturing empire from nothing. He saw my decision to become a lawyer instead of joining the family business as a betrayal. When I married a woman he didn't approve of, that was the final straw. He tried to disinherit me, claimed I was incompetent, that my wife was a gold digger. It took me 2 years to win that fight. Did you, I asked, win? I won the legal case, he clarified, his eyes holding a distant shadow. I got my share of the inheritance, but I lost my family. What was left of it anyway? He looked at me, his expression serious. Winning has costs, Hannah. You need to be sure you know what you're fighting for. What do you actually want at the end of all this? The money, the company, or for them to admit they were wrong? The question hung in the air between us. I thought about it for a long, quiet moment. The anger was still there, a hot coal in my gut, but underneath it, something else was stirring, a deeper, more painful question. I said slowly, the words feeling heavy and unfamiliar, to not feel like I wasted 9 years of my life. The next morning, we escalated our own offensive. Michael had engaged a private investigator, a retired HPD detective, with a reputation for being discreet and thorough. His name was Sal, and he had the tired, patient eyes of a man who had seen every possible version of human betrayal. The sister Leah Pierce, Sal said, flipping open a notebook in Michael's office. She's not as clever as she thinks she is. He laid out a series of photographs on the conference table. They were screenshots from social media public posts from Leah's friends. One showed a group of people on a boat in Galveston, the sun bright overhead. Leah was in the center of the photo, laughing, her arms slung around a man who was definitely not Evan Cole. Meet Marcus Webb, Sal said, tapping the man's smiling face. 34 years old, works in the oil and gas industry, has a nice condo in River Oaks. According to her friends' posts, he and Leah have been seeing each other on and off for the better part of a year. A year? The timeline overlapped entirely with her affair with my husband. It gets better, Sal continued, pushing another document across the table. It was a printout of flight records and hotel receipts. Your husband, Evan Cole, was at a logistics conference in Chicago from April 12th to April 15th of this year. I believe you were running the company solo that week, Miss Cole. I nodded, my mind racing. I remembered that week perfectly. It had been hell. A shipping strike had snarled up the port, and I had worked 3 18-hour days in a row to reroute our carriers. Well, Sal said with a dry smile, while Mr. Cole was eating deep dish pizza in Chicago, his miracle baby was likely being conceived in a beachfront rental in Galveston. He pointed to the date on a photo of Leah and Marcus, their faces close together, the sunset glowing behind them. It was dated April 14th. The air left my lungs in a rush. It wasn't just a parallel relationship. It was a fundamental deception. The baby, the miracle that Judith was using to justify my erasure, the proof Evan was using to absolve his conscience. It might not even be his. This is dynamite, Michael said softly, looking at the evidence. But it's not definitive. We need more. How do we get more? I asked. As part of the divorce discovery process, we have the right to request certain documents, Michael explained. Financials, communications, and medical records. A sudden memory, sharp and painful, surfaced. The fertility treatments, I said. We went through years of them. Every doctor, every specialist. They always focused on me, every test, every procedure. It was always my fault, my failure. Did Evan ever get fully tested? Michael asked. No, I whispered. He refused. He said he didn't need to. He said it was obviously my issue. And I believed him. For 9 years, I had carried the burden of that failure alone. The shame of it. The quiet, gnawing feeling of being defective. Michael looked at me, his expression unreadable. Then we'll subpoena the records from every clinic you visited, he said, his voice firm. Standard procedure. Let's see what the complete picture looks like. The counterattack from the Cole family was not just legal. It was personal and swift. It was a war fought on multiple fronts. Carmen was the first to warn me. She called me late one night, that her voice hushed and strained. Hannah, they hired a forensic accountant, a real shark. He's tearing through everything looking for any transaction that looks even slightly unusual. Judith is feeding him this narrative that you were siphoning money for years. The next day, the real-world consequences began. The first call was from Mark Jensen, the CEO of Jensen Shipping, one of my oldest and most loyal clients. Hannah, I got a strange call today, he said, his voice hesitant. It was from Judith Cole. She told me you'd had some sort of mental breakdown, that you were no longer with the company, and that I should be concerned about the stability of my contracts. My hand tightened on the phone. Mark, that is absolutely not true. I know that, he said quickly. I've known you for 7 years, but she's calling everyone Hannah, planting seeds of doubt. You need to get ahead of this. But it was already too late. 2 more calls came in that afternoon. 2 smaller, more nervous clients were terminating their contracts, citing instability and uncertainty at Cole Logistics. It didn't matter that I was the source of the stability. Judith was poisoning the well, using the Cole name and her social standing to methodically dismantle my professional life. Then came the email from my bank. A formal sterile notification that my personal and business accounts for Pierce Consulting had been frozen, pending an investigation into the fraud allegations filed in court. I was locked out. My resources, my ability to fight back, were being systematically choked off. I felt like I was in a room where the walls were slowly closing and the air getting thinner with every passing hour. The rumors, the legal threats, the financial freeze. It was a coordinated assault designed to leave me isolated, broke, and unable to defend myself. They weren't just trying to win. They were trying to annihilate me. The conference room felt like a pressurized chamber. For 3 days, Michael, his junior associates, and I had done nothing but eat, sleep, and breathe my case. We were building a fortress of facts, brick by painful brick, to withstand the hurricane Judith was sending my way. The evidence package, when it was finally assembled, was a thing of beauty. It was a complete, irrefutable narrative of the last 9 years. There was Carmen's contribution, a binder 3 inches thick, filled with emails, memos, and project timelines. It was a meticulous, date-stamped record of my work, proving I was not just an employee, but the chief architect and operator of Cole Logistics. It included Evan's calendars, which showed him on the golf course during 3 major contract negotiations I had single-handedly won. There was Sal's report on Leah. It detailed her year-long relationship with Marcus Webb, complete with photos, timelines, and travel records that placed her in Galveston during the likely window of conception, while Evan was hundreds of miles away. It wasn't proof of paternity, but it was a powerful suggestion of deceit. Most importantly, there were the financial records. My legal team had traced the origin of every dollar used to start Pierce Consulting. It all led back to a brokerage account I had opened and funded 5 years before I even met Evan Cole. The fraud claim was not just a lie, it was a provable, transparent lie. We even had discreetly obtained testimonials from 2 former senior employees, both of whom had left Cole Logistics because of Evan's incompetence. and Judith's interference. They were willing to testify that I was the de facto CEO of the company. Looking at the mountain of evidence spread across the polished table, I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in months: confidence. A hard, sharp-edged certainty. This was not a story. This was the truth codified in paper and ink. For the first time, it felt like victory was not just possible, but within reach. "They won't know what hit them," Michael said, closing the final binder with a satisfying thud. "Their fraud claim is baseless. Their narrative about your contributions is a joke, and their miracle baby is a ticking time bomb." A settlement meeting was scheduled. Their lawyer, a slick, silver-haired man named Harmon, had requested it. They were ready to make an offer. They thought they had me cornered, that the frozen bank accounts and reputation attacks had broken my will. They were about to find out how wrong they were. The meeting was held in a neutral conference room at a downtown mediation center. The air was thick with a tense, artificial politeness. Judith sat ramrod straight, the picture of a grieved matriarchy. Evan sat beside her, looking uncomfortable, avoiding my gaze. Leah was not present. They were shielding their precious pregnant asset from the conflict. Mr. Harmon started the proceedings with an air of magnanimous condescension. "My clients are prepared to be generous in the interest of resolving this unfortunate matter quickly and privately," he began. "They are willing to offer Ms. Cole a one-time payment of $500,000 in exchange for which she will walk away and relinquish all claims to Cole Logistics and any other community assets." $500,000. It was an insult. It was less than the profit I had generated for the company in the last quarter alone. I didn't say a word. I just looked at Michael. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "My client rejects your offer," Michael said calmly. He slid one of our binders across the table. It landed in front of Harmon with a heavy thud. "That is a valuation report from a neutral third-party accounting firm. It places the current market value of Cole Logistics at $4.2 million, a value we are prepared to prove in court that is a direct result of my client's work and intellectual property." He slid a second binder across the table. "That is the evidence refuting your client's baseless claim of constructive fraud. It proves conclusively that Pierce Consulting was funded with Ms. Cole's separate premarital assets." Finally, he pushed a third thinner folder toward them. "And that is a summary of evidence regarding the timeline of Miss Leah Pierce's pregnancy." "I'm sure you'll find the travel records for the month of April particularly interesting." I watched Judith's face. The polite mask wavered. Her eyes, cold and sharp, darted from the folders to me. She had expected a beggar. She was facing an army. Evan just looked confused, his gaze shifting between his mother and his lawyer, a puppet waiting for his strings to be pulled. Harmon opened the first binder. His slick composure cracked as he scanned the first few pages. He flipped through the financials, the client testimonials, the irrefutable proof of my role. He looked up, his expression now one of professional concern rather than arrogance. He leaned over and whispered something to Judith. "We are prepared to counter," Michael continued, his voice cutting through the tense silence. "My client will retain 100% ownership of her separate property, Pierce Consulting and all its assets, valued at an additional $1.8 million. Furthermore, she will take a 60% share of Cole Logistics, reflecting her role as the primary driver of the company's success. She is the personal goodwill. Without her, the company is just a name and a handful of depreciating trucks." The room was silent. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been completely inverted. I held all the cards. I could see the shock and fury warring in Judith's eyes. This was not how her plan was supposed to go. Harmon cleared his throat. "We need a few moments to confer with our client." He and Judith stood up and moved to a corner of the room, their backs to us, their voices a low, angry buzz. Evan remained at the table looking lost. I had them. The evidence was overwhelming. The lies were exposed. The victory was so close, I could taste it. But when Judith and Harmon returned to the table, the panic in her eyes was gone. It had been replaced by a familiar reptilian coldness. And she was smiling. It was a thin, tight, terrible smile. "You think you're so clever, Hannah," she said, her voice soft and full of venom. All your little papers and your timelines. But you forgot something important, something you did. My blood went cold. What had I missed? Mr. Harmon placed a new folder on the table. It was slim, almost insignificant compared to our mountain of evidence. He opened it and turned it around for us to see. It was a forensic accountant's report. It showed a series of financial transfers over the past 4 years. Small amounts at first, then larger. A total of just over $200,000 moved from a coal logistics operating account into the primary account for Pierce Consulting. These transfers, Harmon said, his voice dripping with false solemnity, were made by your client without Mr. Cole's signature or explicit written consent. Our forensic accountant has identified this as a clear pattern of embezzlement disguised as consulting fees. Those were legitimate payments for services rendered, Michael shot back immediately. Pierce Consulting provided patented software and strategic services to coal logistics. It's all in the service agreement. An agreement you had your husband sign without legal counsel? Harmon countered smoothly. An agreement that is vague on deliverables. What it looks like, Ms. Cole, is that you use the community-owned company as your personal piggy bank to fund your separate property. It's not just constructive fraud, it's criminal fraud. The room spun. Criminal. The word landed like a physical blow. We are prepared, Harmon continued, his eyes locking onto mine, to refer this matter to the district attorney's office. However, in the interest of avoiding a public scandal that would harm the family, all of the family, my clients are willing to stand by their original generous offer. $500,000, and you drop all claims. And we don't press charges. I stared at the bank statements. The transfers were real. They were my legitimate earnings, the fees my consulting company charged the parent company for my work, a structure my own lawyers had set up for tax purposes years ago. It was all legal, all above board. But without the complete paper trail of invoices and corresponding work logs, which I hadn't been meticulous about keeping between my own two companies. It looked bad. It looked criminal. In a single devastating moment, my imminent victory had transformed into a potential prison sentence. The power Judith held over me was no longer just financial. It was the threat of utter ruin, of public humiliation, and a criminal record. This was her checkmate. She had been planning this all along. She had let me create the very paper trail she now intended to use as a noose. The ride back to Michael's office was a blur. The city lights seemed to mock me with their brightness. The confidence I had felt just an hour ago had evaporated, replaced by a cold, sickening dread. I sank into a chair in his office, the adrenaline draining away, leaving me feeling hollowed out. They can't prove it, Michael said, already on his feet, pacing again. We can fight this. We can pull the work logs match every transfer to a project deliverable. We can prove the payments were legitimate consulting fees. But Hannah, it will be a nightmare. A criminal threat changes everything. The burden of proof shifts. This is no longer just a divorce. This is a fight to clear your name. My financial battle had suddenly become a fight for my survival. My strategy had been to go on offense to reclaim what was mine. Now I was thrown back on the defensive, scrambling to prove I wasn't a thief. She planned this. I said the words barely a whisper. From the very beginning, she knew about those transfers. She was just waiting for the right moment to use them. Michael stopped in front of me, his expression harder than I had ever seen it. Then we need to find what she didn't plan for. They think this is their ultimate weapon, their ace in the hole. We need to find their weakness, something they think is their greatest strength but is actually their most vulnerable point. My mind raced through everything we knew. Judith's obsession with image, Evan's weakness, Leah's greed. And then it hit me, a single clarifying thought that cut through the fog of fear. The baby, the foundation of their entire moral high ground, the justification for everything they had done, the symbol of their victory and my failure. Evan's miracle, and it might be the biggest lie of all. If the baby isn't Evan's, Michael said the words hanging in the still air of his office, Their entire case collapses. Not just the legal case, but the moral one. The fear that had been gripping me since the settlement meeting began to recede, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. He was right. Their whole narrative, the righteous family securing its bloodline, the long-suffering husband finally blessed with a child, the barren wife being justly set aside, it all rested on the fragile foundation of that pregnancy. If that foundation was a lie, the entire house of cards came tumbling down. Judith's play was to paint me as a criminal to nullify my claims. I reasoned, the strategic part of my brain kicking back into gear. If we prove the heir isn't an heir at all, we're not just defending anymore. We're exposing their entire justification as a fraud. Exactly, Michael agreed. Evan's miracle becomes his public humiliation. The family's new beginning becomes a scandal. Judith's reputation as a protector of the Cole legacy is destroyed. It's the one thing she would never anticipate because she is so blinded by her own narrative. The plan shifted in that moment. The battle was no longer about accounting records and consulting fees. It was about paternity. "Sal," Michael said, picking up his phone, "I need you back on Leah Pierce and Marcus Webb. I don't want a timeline. I want a complete history. Every dinner, every weekend trip, every text message you can legally obtain. I want to know them better than they know themselves." Our counter-offensive had a new singular focus. We pivoted from defending my integrity to questioning theirs, but the enemy wasn't idle. While we were digging into Leah's past, Judith was carpet-bombing my present. The attacks came in a relentless, suffocating wave. It felt as though 100 invisible hands were dismantling my life piece by piece. First, the professional world I had built began to crumble. Maxwell Industries, my biggest client and a relationship I had nurtured for 6 years, put our contract under review. The CEO, a man I considered a friend, wouldn't take my calls. His assistant informed my lawyer that they had concerns about the ongoing litigation and associated fraud allegations. Judith had gotten to them. Her whispers were more powerful than my years of proven results. Then, my personal world started to shrink. An invitation to a charity gala I had attended for years was politely rescinded. An old colleague from my first job texted me a screenshot of a post from a private Houston business forum. It was an anonymous comment, but the language was pure Judith. Word is, the brains behind Cole Logistics wasn't so brilliant after all. More of a con artist. Sad to see a good family taken advantage of like that. My name was being systematically turned to mud in the circles I had worked so hard to belong to. I felt like a ghost watching the life I had built become unrecognizable. I was isolated, my reputation in tatters, my resources frozen. Even Carmen's communications became strained. She was still feeding us information, but her calls were brief, her emails terse. I knew Judith was watching her, and I couldn't bear the thought of my one remaining ally being dragged down with me. The pressure was immense, a constant weight on my chest. There were moments in the dead of night in my sterile, empty apartment when I would stare at the ceiling and wonder if I should just give up. Take the $500,000 sign, whatever they wanted me to sign, and just disappear. Start over somewhere no one knew my name. Somewhere the word Cole didn't follow me like a curse. Was I wrong? Was this fight worth the cost? The old corrosive self-doubt that Judith had so expertly cultivated for 9 years began to creep back in. The feeling of being defective, of being not quite good enough. Maybe they were right. Maybe I had overstepped. Maybe I was the one who had destroyed everything. It was in the midst of that suffocating doubt that the final blow landed. It came not from Judith, but from the past. It arrived in a thick manila envelope delivered by courier to Michael's office. The subpoenaed medical records had arrived. I sat in the conference room, the file open before me. Michael had offered to review them first, but I needed to see it for myself. I needed to read the story of the 9 years I had spent believing I was broken. I flipped through the pages. Consultation notes, test results, hormone panels. Each page was a reminder of a painful, invasive procedure, a hope raised and then dashed. My history laid out in cold clinical terms. It all pointed to the same inconclusive diagnosis, unexplained infertility. The doctors had never found a definitive reason for my inability to conceive, but the unspoken assumption had always been that the problem was mine. Evan was healthy, vibrant, a coal. I was the outsider, the weak link. I was near the end of the file when I saw it. A section from 7 years ago from a specialist we had seen early on. It was a lab report attached to a consultation summary. It was Evan's file, not mine. He had, at the doctor's insistence, undergone one single comprehensive test. I read the summary, my eyes scanning the medical jargon. Then I saw the phrase circled in red pen by the doctor himself. Severe oligospermia with poor motility. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't know the exact medical definition, but I knew what it meant. Low sperm count, extremely low, and what little there was didn't move well. The consultation note below it was even more damning. Discussed results with both Mr. and Mrs. Cole. Explained that natural conception would be statistically miraculous. Recommended immediate consultation regarding IVF with ICSI as the only viable path forward. I remembered that day. I remembered the doctor's somber tone. But I didn't remember the diagnosis. Not this one. Evan had intercepted the follow-up call. He had come home and told me the results were all clear on his end. He'd said the doctor wanted to focus on a new, more aggressive round of treatments for me. He had lied. For 7 years he had known. He had known that the problem was not mine alone, but very likely his. He had sat beside me in waiting rooms, held my hand while I got injections, and comforted me after every failed cycle, all while carrying this secret. He had allowed me to bear the full weight of the blame, the shame, and the grief. He had allowed his mother to call me defective, to treat me like a failed piece of equipment, knowing the entire time that he was the one who was, if not broken, then certainly not whole. The betrayal was so profound, so much deeper than infidelity, that it hollowed me out. The affair with my sister was the betrayal of our marriage vows. This was the betrayal of my soul. He had allowed me to believe I was fundamentally flawed as a woman, letting that belief corrode my self-worth for the better part of a decade. And Leah's pregnancy, it hadn't just been a convenient excuse for him, it had been his redemption. When she told him she was pregnant, he hadn't just seen a way out of our marriage. He had seen what he desperately needed to see his miracle. It was the proof he had been waiting for. It proved that he wasn't sterile, just challenged. It proved that I and I alone had been the curse all along. His delusion wasn't just a convenience, it was a psychological necessity. The pieces all fell into place, forming a picture of such devastating cruelty that I felt myself begin to break. I rested my forehead on the cool, polished surface of the conference table. The fortress of facts I had built, the confidence I had felt, it all crumbled into dust. What was I even fighting for? The company, the money. It all seemed so meaningless now. My marriage hadn't just been unhappy, it had been a lie. A 9-year performance in which I was the only one who didn't know her lines. Evan wasn't just a weak man who had cheated on me. He was a coward who had used my body, my love, and my grief as a shield to protect his own fragile pride. Everything crashed down on me at once. The public humiliation, the impending criminal investigation, the destruction of my business, and now the sickening realization that the very foundation of my marriage, my womanhood, had been a carefully constructed deception. I had lost. I hadn't just lost the company or the money. I had lost the last 9 years of my life to a fiction. I had been a placeholder in a story that was never even real. The fight drained out of me, replaced by a vast, empty despair. What was the point of fighting them? They had already taken everything that mattered. That night, back in the apartment, the collapse was complete. I didn't cry. I was beyond tears. I was in a place of cold, hollow emptiness. I sat on the floor leaning against the bare wall, the silence of the room pressing in on me. Michael's words echoed in my head. Is it worth it? No, it wasn't. Maybe I should just call him in the morning. Tell him to take the deal. Let them have it all. The company, the money, the victory. Let them have their sordid, miserable lives. I just wanted it to be over. My self-pity was a bottomless well. What had any of it been for all the sacrifices, the long hours, the silent suffering? I had given up everything to be a part of their family, to earn Judith's approval, to build a life with Evan. And for what? To be discarded like a piece of trash the moment something better came along. A thought, small and sharp, pierced through the fog of despair. I didn't lose because I couldn't have a child. I lost because I thought I had to sacrifice my entire self to be accepted by a family who never saw my worth in the first place. The phone on the counter buzzed. A text message. It buzzed again. And again. I ignored it. It was probably Michael, or a news alert, or some other meaningless intrusion. Nothing mattered anymore. I closed my eyes, wanting only to sleep, to disappear, to stop feeling the weight of my own wasted life. The phone buzzed one last time insistently. With a sigh of profound weariness, I finally reached for it. The screen was lit up with messages from Sal the investigator. The first one read, "Found something on Marcus Webb. Big." The second, "This is a game changer." The third, "It's about the baby. You need to call me. Now." I stared at the screen. A part of me, a tiny resilient ember, that had somehow survived the flood of despair, flickered. But I couldn't move. I couldn't bring myself to care. What was the point? What could possibly change the fact that my life had been a lie? I let the phone slip from my fingers and clatter to the floor, the screen going dark. I don't know how long I sat there. The sunset painting the bare walls of my apartment in shades of orange and gray before surrendering to the darkness. I didn't turn on a light. The darkness felt appropriate, a fitting cloak for the emptiness inside me. My phone lay on the floor where I had dropped it, a dead silent square. I hadn't eaten. I hadn't moved. I had simply ceased. A sharp, insistent knocking at the door startled me back to the present. It wasn't loud, but it was persistent. I ignored it. It continued, a steady, rhythmic tapping that refused to be ignored. Finally, a voice cut through the wood. "Hannah, it's Michael. I know you're in there. I'm not leaving until you open this door." With a weariness that felt ancient, I pulled myself to my feet. My limbs were stiff, my body cold. I unlocked the door and opened it a few inches. Michael stood in the brightly lit hallway, his face a mask of professional concern. His eyes took in my appearance, the rumpled clothes I'd been wearing for a day and a half, my uncombed hair, the profound emptiness in my eyes. He didn't comment. "Can I come in?" he asked gently. I stepped back without a word, letting him pass. He walked into the dark living room, his presence filling the space. He didn't turn on a light. Instead, he just stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle. Then he sat on the floor a few feet away from where I had been leaning his back against the sofa. He didn't push. He didn't probe. He just sat with me in the darkness. We sat in silence for a long time. The only sounds were the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sigh of traffic from the street below. It was his stillness, his quiet, patient presence that finally broke through the wall of my despair. "He knew," I whispered the words raw and brittle in the quiet room. "For 7 years, Evan knew about his sperm count. He let me believe I was the one who was broken." My voice cracked, and the story came pouring out, a torrent of grief and rage I could no longer contain. 9 years, Michael. I gave them 9 years of my life. I built them a company, and they erased me in a single dinner. He watched his mother call me a placeholder. He watched my own sister parade her pregnancy, his miracle, like a prize she had won. It wasn't just a miracle because she got pregnant. It was a miracle because it proved I was the curse. He had finally escaped. Michael didn't offer empty reassurances. He just listened, his gaze steady and focused in the dim light. When I finally fell silent, exhausted by my own pain, he asked a simple, devastating question. "What do you want now?" he asked, his voice soft. "Forget the company. Forget the money. Forget revenge. What do you, Hannah Pierce, actually want?" The question stripped away everything. The anger, the strategy, the fight. It demanded a truth I hadn't dared to face. What did I want? I wanted the last 9 years back. I wanted a husband who had loved me. I wanted a sister who hadn't betrayed me. I wanted a family that hadn't used me. But I couldn't have any of that. I took a long, shuddering breath. The truth, when it finally came, was quiet and clear. "I want to stop needing their approval." I said the words feeling foreign and powerful on my tongue. "I want to walk away from this and know deep in my bones that I am worth something. Even if they never admit it, even if I never have a child, I want to know that I am enough." That was it. That was the real need, the raw, aching wound beneath everything else. The fight for the company had become a proxy war for my own self-worth, a desperate attempt to force them to acknowledge the value they had so casually discarded. Michael nodded slowly, as if I had just confirmed something he already knew. "When I won my case against my father," he said, his voice dropping into a more personal register, "I stood there with the judgment in my hand, and I expected to feel this huge sense of vindication. But all I felt was empty." He paused, looking at some distant memory. Because I realized the victory didn't matter. I still wanted him to turn to me and say, "You did good, son. I'm proud of you." He never did. He died 2 years later without ever speaking to me again. I had to learn that his approval wasn't the point. It was never the point. The point was learning to be okay without it. His words landed like stones in a still pond, the ripples spreading out through my entire being. I had been fighting the wrong war. I was so focused on winning against them that I had forgotten what it meant to win for myself. My worth wasn't a prize they could award or withhold. It was inherent. I had built a multi-million-dollar company from nothing. I was smart, capable, and resilient. That was all true whether they acknowledged it or not. A profound shift occurred inside me, a quiet turning. The rage didn't disappear, but it changed its nature. It was no longer the desperate, wounded rage of a victim. It was the cold, focused anger of a woman who had finally realized her own power. The fight was no longer about forcing them to see my value. It was about reclaiming it for myself. "I don't need them to admit I was valuable," I said, my voice stronger now. "I just need to stop forgetting that I am." "Good," Michael said, a hint of a smile in his voice. "Because Sal found something. Something I think you'll want to see." He gestured to my phone on the floor. I picked it up, my hand steady now. I called Sal. "Hannah," he said, his voice all business. "Glad you called. I think I know why your sister has been looking so radiant." We met in Michael's office the next morning. The despair of the previous night was gone, replaced by a calm, quiet resolve. I felt lighter, as if I had shed a heavy skin I had been wearing for 9 years. Sal laid out his findings on the conference table. "Marcus Webb, Leah's other boyfriend, isn't just some guy she was seeing on the side," he began. "His family is old Houston money, not coal money, but solid. They've been in oil and gas for 3 generations. But here's the kicker." He pushed a file across the table. It was a financial background check. "Marcus's personal finances are a mess. He's got a gambling problem. Big one. He's leveraged up to his eyeballs, owes money all over town. He's been living off his family's name, but the well is about to run dry. He needed a lifeline. A rich wife would be perfect." "Leah wasn't a rich wife," I pointed out. "No," Sal agreed. "But the sister of the man who owns Coal Logistics, the future mother of the coal heir, that's a very attractive connection for a man looking for a bailout." Then he delivered the final devastating piece of evidence. The pregnancy timeline was bothering me. The dates were tight. So I did some digging. Leah had a private obstetrician in the memorial area. I managed to get a copy of her initial patient intake form, the one she filled out on her first visit. He slid a single piece of paper into the center of the table. It was a copy of a standard medical form. Near the bottom was a section titled, Date of Last Menstrual Period. A date was written in Leah's loopy, familiar handwriting. Michael and I leaned in. He did the math first, his mind quick and sharp. The date she wrote down, he said slowly, would place the date of conception squarely in the middle of the week Evan was in Chicago. And the same week, Sal added a grim satisfaction in his voice, that she and Marcus Webb were on that little vacation in Galveston. There it was. The smoking gun. The miracle baby, the heir that had justified my disposal. The living proof of my failure and Evan's virility was almost certainly another man's child. My sister hadn't just betrayed me with my husband. She had been playing a dangerous game with two different men and had used a pregnancy to secure the wealthier prize. A new plan began to form in my mind, not one born of rage or revenge, but of cool, clear strategy. It was no longer about destruction. It was about liberation. Back in our war room, the whiteboard was wiped clean. We started fresh. We don't use this to humiliate them publicly, I said, the idea taking shape as I spoke. That's Judith's tactic. It's beneath us. We use it as leverage. We use it to get what we want and walk away clean. The new plan was simple, elegant, deadly. Step 1. We address their criminal fraud allegation head-on. We compile the irrefutable evidence that the transfers were legitimate consulting fees, proving their claim is malicious and defamatory. We neutralize their only weapon. Step 2. Once they are disarmed, I request a private meeting, with Judith alone, no lawyers. Step 3. In that meeting, I present her with the truth about Leah's baby. Not as a threat, but as a fact. I give her a choice between two outcomes. Outcome A, I said, writing on the board. She drops the fraud charges immediately. She agrees to our original settlement terms. I get Pierce Consulting and my fair share of coal logistics. In return, the truth about the baby's paternity stays private. Evan never has to know his miracle was a lie. Her precious family image, however tarnished, remains intact to the outside world. And outcome B? Michael asked. Outcome B is what happens if she refuses, I said. We reject any settlement, and we proceed to a public contested divorce trial. And in that trial, every secret comes out. Evan's 7-year lie about his infertility, Leah's affair with Marcus Webb, and a formal request for a court-ordered paternity test. We let the truth blow their family apart in the most public way imaginable. It was a perfect trap designed to use Judith's own greatest weakness, her obsession with image and control, against her. To save her family from public humiliation, she would have to give me everything I wanted. Carmen provided the final piece of the puzzle. On a secure conference call, she confirmed what I had long suspected. There are at least a dozen key employees, Hannah, she said, from senior logistics coordinators to our best drivers. They know you built this place. They are loyal to you, not to the coal name. If you walk, they walk with you. It was the ultimate confirmation. The company wasn't the building or the name on the door. It was the people. And the people were mine. That evening, I sat alone in my apartment. The silence was no longer empty. It was filled with a quiet, calm strength. I picked up my phone. I didn't call Michael. I didn't call Carmen. I sent a single text message to a number I knew by heart. Judith, we need to talk. Just the two of us. I have something you need to see about Leah. The final preparations felt different. The frantic defensive energy of the past few weeks had been replaced by a calm, deliberate focus. In Michael's office, we weren't planning a battle. We were choreographing an ending. Carmen had delivered the last pieces of evidence we needed to dismantle the fraud claim. A complete set of invoices from Pierce Consulting to Cole Logistics, cross-referenced with project completion reports I had filed. It was a perfect, unbroken paper trail. Their primary weapon was now officially a dud. "You seem different," Carmen noted during a brief video call, her image clear on the large screen in the conference room. "Calmer. I used to want them to admit they were wrong," I said, the realization settling over me as I spoke the words. "Now, I just want what's mine, so I can build something new." It was the truth. The burning need for their validation had cooled, leaving behind the hard, clear desire for justice and the freedom to move on. The outcome of the war no longer defined my worth. It would simply define my future. With all our weapons assembled, the legal protection of the partition agreement, the loyalty of the key staff, the truth about Evan's infertility, and the devastating secret of the baby's paternity, I was ready. Judith chose the location, a private room at the stuffy old money Houston Country Club where she held court. It was a power play, an attempt to put me on her turf, to remind me of the world I had tried so desperately to belong to. But as I walked across the manicured lawn, the place felt foreign, a relic from a life that no longer belonged to me. She was already seated at a small table, a cup of untouched tea before her. She looked imperial confident, expecting to find me broken and ready to surrender. She found something else entirely. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I sat down and placed a thin folder on the table between us. "What is this?" she asked, her voice dripping with disdain. "It's a timeline," I said calmly. I opened the folder. Inside were two documents. One was a copy of Evan's travel itinerary from his business trip to Chicago in April. The other was a printout of the Galveston hotel receipt for Marcus Webb for the exact same dates. Evan was in Chicago. Leah was in Galveston with another man. According to her own doctor's records, that is the week her baby was conceived. I watched the color drain from her face. Her carefully constructed composure fractured, revealing the raw panic underneath. For the first time, I saw her not as a monster, but as a terrified woman who had built her entire identity on a foundation of control, a foundation that was now crumbling. She tried to rally. "This is circumstantial. It proves nothing." "It proves enough for a court-ordered paternity test," I countered, my voice even and steady. "And we both know that Leah will refuse to comply. Her refusal will tell everyone, including Evan, everything he needs to know. His miracle isn't his. The Cole family heir isn't a Cole." The words hung in the air, a death sentence for her dynasty. The bloodline she had sacrificed my happiness for was a lie. "What do you want?" she finally whispered, the fight gone from her voice. "It's very simple," I said, leaning forward. "You will instruct your lawyer to immediately withdraw the fraudulent criminal complaint against me. You will then agree to a settlement. I keep my separate property, Pierce Consulting, with all its patents and intellectual property. I also receive my fair 50% share of the community property, Cole Logistics, in a cash buyout. In exchange for that, this folder and everything in it disappears." This conversation never happened. Evan gets to keep his delusion, and your family's precious reputation remains intact. I paused, letting the choice settle. "Or you can refuse, and I will burn everything to the ground in a public courtroom. Your call." She was stalling, trying to negotiate, to find an angle, a weakness. Her mind was racing, looking for a way to regain control. I decided to take that away from her too. "I know about Evan's first girlfriend," I said quietly. "The one from college. The one who wasn't right for the family. I found her, Judith. She's a very successful architect in Austin now, and she remembers in perfect detail how you systematically destroyed her reputation and her relationship with Evan because she didn't come from the right family. She is more than willing to testify about your pattern of disposing of women who don't serve your purpose." That was the final blow. The exposure of her pattern, the threat of a witness to her cruelty, broke through her last defenses. The mask of the powerful matriarch shattered completely. I saw the fear in her eyes, not the fear of losing money, but the fear of being seen, truly seen for the monster she was. "You called me a placeholder," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "But the truth is, I was the only real thing in that company, the only real thing holding Evan's life together, and you couldn't stand it because it wasn't on your terms. You didn't just want an heir, you wanted a legacy you could control, and I was never going to be that for you." The resolution was swift and silent. Weeks later, in a sterile courtroom hallway that smelled of floor wax and quiet desperation, the final papers were signed. Judith had folded completely. The baseless fraud charges were withdrawn, accompanied by a formal apology from her lawyer. The settlement was executed exactly as I had demanded. I walked away with Pierce, consulting my intellectual property, my client relationships, and a check for $2.1 million, my half of the hollowed-out company I had built. Evan was left with the name Cole Logistics, a mountain of debt and a staff of junior employees who had no idea how to run the place. The truth, as it always does, had found its way out. Judith, in her cold fury, had forced a paternity test, hoping against hope that I was wrong. The results confirmed it. The baby was Marcus Webb's. Leah, seeing her golden ticket about to be torn up, disappeared from the Cole family's life as quickly as she had entered it, running to a future with a man who was not nearly as wealthy as she had believed. The final scene of the tragedy played out in that courthouse hallway. Evan approached me after the proceedings were over. He looked broken, deflated, a ghost of the man I had once loved. "I didn't know," he stammered, his eyes pleading, "about Leah and Marcus. I swear, Hannah, I really thought it was my miracle. I thought that finally I could prove I wasn't—" He trailed off, unable to say the word. Defective. I looked at him not with hatred, but with a profound, sorrowful pity. "You knew about your sperm count for 7 years, Evan," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "You let me carry that burden alone. You let your mother call me a placeholder while you knew the truth. That's not love, that's not a mistake, that's cowardice." He had no answer. For the first time, he was forced to see himself clearly, without the shield of my love or his mother's ambition. He was just a weak man who had made a terrible series of choices. Across the hall, I saw Judith watching us, her face a mask of shattered pride. She had lost everything. She valued her control, her public image, her imagined heir, and the unity of the family she had tried to build through cruelty. She had won nothing. 6 months later, the Houston sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new office. The name on the glass door, etched in clean, modern font, read Pierce Logistics Solutions. My name, my company. It wasn't small anymore. We were growing faster than I had ever anticipated. Carmen was my COO, and the 12 key employees who had walked away from Cole Logistics with her formed the brilliant, loyal core of our new venture. Our old clients, the ones who had valued my work over the Cole name, had followed me without hesitation. Michael stopped by that afternoon, a casual visit that was becoming more frequent. He was no longer my lawyer. The nature of our relationship was slowly, naturally evolving into something new, something earned. "Dinner tomorrow?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. "I'd like that," I said, a genuine smile coming easily. After he left, my gaze fell on a new photo on my desk. It wasn't of the Cole family, a relic of a life I had survived. It was a picture of my new team taken at our company launch party. Carmen was beside me, her arm thrown around my shoulder, both of us laughing. These were the people who had chosen to stand with me, my real family. The opening scene of my old life, sitting alone and silent at that dinner table, being called a placeholder, being erased, felt like a story about someone else. Here in this office, surrounded by the hum of my own creation, I was the furthest thing from a placeholder. I was the architect. I had not lost because I couldn't have a child. I had almost lost because I'd believed I had to sacrifice my entire life to be accepted by a family that was incapable of love. But real family, I had learned, are the people who choose to stay. I didn't need a child to have value. My value was not up for debate. I had it all along. The office was quiet. It was late, well past the time my team had gone home, but I often stayed not out of necessity, but because I liked the peace. I liked the clean scent of lemon from the night cruise polish and the low, steady hum of the servers that were the heart of my new company. It was a sound of my own making. I was reviewing a new contract when an email popped up, its subject line different from the usual chain of business communications. It simply read, "A question for Hannah Pierce." Curious, I opened it. It was from a woman I didn't know. A name, Sarah Gable, that meant nothing to me. The email began, "Dear Miss Pierce, you don't know me, but I feel like I know you. A woman who used to work at Cole Logistics in the accounting department is in my book club. Over the past few months, she has told us your story, or at least the version of it that has become a kind of legend among the women who knew what was really happening there." My fingers froze over the keyboard. A legend. "She told us they called you a placeholder," the email continued, "and that one day you decided to burn the whole book. I'm writing to you because I think I might be a placeholder too. For my entire life, actually." My mother passed away 2 months ago. I was her primary caregiver for 12 years, ever since my father died. I handled her appointments, her finances, her meals. I was the one who sat with her through the long nights. My brother David, who lives in California, visited twice a year for the holidays. He was always the golden child, the successful one. I was just dependable Sarah. When the will was read, I discovered that my mother had signed a new one, 6 months before she died. On a day David had flown in for a surprise visit, everything was left to him. The house I grew up in, the house I had been maintaining for over a decade. Her savings. My name wasn't mentioned except to say that I had been otherwise provided for by my own marriage. When I confronted David, he wasn't even angry. He was just dismissive. He said it was what Mom wanted, that I had my husband to take care of me and that he needed the money for his business. He acted like my 12 years of service were just what a daughter was supposed to do, not a contribution worth acknowledging, not an inheritance I had earned 1,000 times over. I leaned back in my chair, my heart aching with a familiar pain. The battlefield was different, but the war was the same. It was the quiet, insidious erasure of a woman's value. The email concluded, "My friend from your old company said that you found a way to fight people who believe they are entitled to your life's work. She said you found a voice when everyone expected you to be silent. My question is, how do you start when you've spent 57 years being the quiet, dependable one? How do you learn to scream?" I read the email again and then a third time. My own story hadn't just been about a divorce or a company. It had been about reclaiming a value that others had tried to assign for me. Sarah's story was about the same thing. Her brother, her parents, they had all told her what her place was. The caregiver, the placeholder, the one who didn't need anything for herself. So many women had stories like this. Stories of being the good daughter, the supportive wife, the peacemaker, only to find that their quiet contributions had been taken for granted, their value completely written off the family ledger. I hit the print button. The quiet hum of the printer filled the office as it produced a physical copy of Sarah's words. I wouldn't just forward this to a lawyer. This was something more. This was a story that deserved an answer. But what was the right one? What do you tell a woman who is ready to fight for her life? For the very first time, I sat with that woman's email for a long time because her story is not unique. Maybe it sounds familiar to you too. Maybe you are the one in your family who is the shock absorber, the keeper of the peace, the one who quietly steps in to fix what others have broken. You do it because you are capable and because it is easier than the conflict that would come if you said no. You operate on a silent, unspoken faith. You believe that if you are good enough, loyal enough, and sacrifice enough, your value will be self-evident. You believe that your contributions are being seen and recorded in some invisible family ledger, and that one day when it truly matters, the people you love will acknowledge what you have done and do the right thing. But the most painful lesson from my story and from Sarah's is this: their validation is not the prize. your own is. A family that is comfortable with your silence is a family that benefits from it. And what is freely given is often valued at nothing. So if you are a placeholder in your own life, what is the first step? It is not to scream. It is to start keeping your own books. You must become the accountant for your own life. Open a ledger that no one else sees. In that book, you will record the hours you spend providing unpaid elder care, the value of the professional advice you give for free at family dinners, the bills you covered to keep the peace, the emotional crises you managed, so someone else wouldn't have to. You are not being selfish by doing this. You are being honest. You are acknowledging that your time, your energy, and your peace of mind are valuable assets. This isn't just an emotional exercise. It is a practical one. This is the documentation you need to protect yourself. It's the proof that your contributions weren't just love, they were labor. It's the clarity that allows you to have conversations about wills, property deeds, and business agreements before a crisis hits. It is your personal partition agreement, a firewall you build around your own worth. The quiet work you do has value. The peace you keep comes at a cost, and the love you give should never require you to be erased. Acknowledging this for yourself is the first most powerful step. It is the moment you stop being a placeholder and start becoming the author of your own story. So I will ask you the question that Sarah asked me, the question that echoes in the quiet moments of so many lives. In what part of your life have you been made to feel like a placeholder silently, waiting for a value that only you can give yourself?